Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Leadership Series webinar for August that will be on the 1, 2, 3s of selling tech to the government. I'm Jennifer Weems and your host for today's webinar. The presentation should last approximately 50 minutes, but before we begin, just wanted to cover a few of our housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are the multiple application widgets that you can use. If you have a question during the webinar, please just click on that Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. We will definitely try to answer those at the end of the webinar, depending on how much time we have left over. If not, if we don't get to your question, then we'll definitely capture that question and follow up with you later via email. A copy of today's slide deck is available in the resource list widget, and that looks like a green folder that's at the bottom of your screen. So simply click on that green folder and you'll see the PDF version of the presentation that you can download for your use. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon that's at the top right of the slide area, or by dragging that bottom right corner of the slide area. If you have any technical difficulty, please just click on that help widget. It has a question mark icon and it covers most common technical issues. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately 1 day after the webcast, and you can access that using the same audience link that you were sent earlier if you would like to listen to the broadcast again. Before you leave the call today, if you could please remember to rate the call using your survey widget. This will be a survey that will automatically pop up at the end of the presentation. So if you can simply fill that out for us, we would really appreciate that. So this completes our housekeeping. We hope everyone's ready. I'm going to turn the presentation over now to our presenter, Mark Wisinger, immixGroup's Market Intelligence Senior Analyst. Mark?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join me. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself and then lay out the format for today's presentation, which is going to be all about the public sector market, particularly the federal and state and local markets. And I'll break down some trends in each of the various technology categories like cloud and cybersecurity, as well as talk about the possibility of a continuing resolution in the beginning of the government's fiscal year of FY18, which starts in October. To start by introducing myself, my name is Mark Wisinger. I'm a part of the Market Intelligence team here at immixGroup, which is the public sector arm of Aero ECS. I'll talk a bit later at the end of the presentation about my team and exactly where I fit on that team and where our various areas of expertise are. So in case you want to learn more or have specific questions about state and local market or a certain part of the federal market, you can reach out and we can see about engaging with you. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about the agenda for today's presentation. As laid out before, we'll talk about what it means to sell in a continuing resolution, which looks pretty likely at this point for the beginning of FY18 with government's uncertainty right now with the budget. Then we'll break down the various technology trends we see across the public sector, including the DoD, civilian agencies, as well as the state and local and education markets. And then at the end, we'll talk about what does my team do? What does Market Intelligence team here at immixGroup do? And how can we help you? And then following that, I'll see if there's any questions that I can address. And if I can't address them now, I'll go ahead and refer them either to another member of my team who may fill that particular area of expertise, or I'll dig up an answer for you later. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into selling in a continuing resolution. So a continuing resolution, which we'll talk about shortly, may occur here in October 1st, which is the beginning of the U.S. federal government's fiscal year. October 1st is the start of that. And we'll talk about exactly what is a continuing resolution, how does it affect you, what does it mean for our community and the market, and then what are some successful strategies for continuing to drive business during continuing resolution. It's going to be the format we're looking at here. So first, let's talk about what is a continuing resolution. And to do that, we really need to break down the federal government's budget process. So the fiscal year for the government starts on October 1st of every year and continues all the way through September 30th. Now, during that fiscal year, the agencies have to go about creating a request for funding for next year's budget. So in FY18, this will usually occur in the beginning of FY17. So because it begins in October 1st, so at the beginning of that fiscal year, say October, November, December, agencies are digging up various priorities that they have for the next upcoming fiscal year and creating a request, which they then send to the White House. The White House takes all the various agency requests across the federal government, from the DoD, from civilian agencies in the intelligence community, and combines that all together with one unified budget request. Now, usually, by standards, the president is supposed to submit that in early February. Sometimes it ends up happening, oftentimes these days, later in February, and then that is sent over as an official White House budget request to Congress. So then Congress is charged with taking a look at this request and passing 12 appropriations bills, which first start in the House and are then passed on to the Senate. And once those have both been approved, then it goes to the President. Now, there are 12 appropriations bills because of the 12 different agencies, and those appropriations bills essentially grant those agencies funding for the upcoming fiscal year in October. So once it passes through Congress, then it goes back to the President for final approval. Now, on paper, this is how the process works. However, continuing resolution reflects one of those possibilities where there's not exactly agreement between Congress, within Congress, or between Congress and the executive branch with the President. So in a continuing resolution, the first two steps go according to plan. The agencies gather up their request, send that over to the President. The President submits that budget request to Congress, but then Congress and the President, they can't agree on the appropriations. Either there's turmoil within the House or the Senate on establishing exactly what the agency's funding should be. Perhaps they don't agree with the President's request. They maybe think that a certain agency is not getting enough funding according to the request, or certain agencies are getting too much. So in this situation, what you see is a continuing resolution usually, which essentially gives agencies the same money as they had last year to do the same things in the upcoming fiscal year. Now, this is usually just a short-term resolution to kind of keep the lights on in the building for Congress and prevent a government shutdown. And it essentially just maintains the status quo for a bit while government kind of gets their act together and Congress and President can reach a more final resolution to carry through the rest of the year. Now, because there's been a lot of uncertainty going through FY17 about the upcoming year's budget and the strong possibility that there will be a continuing resolution, I felt it was very important to talk about exactly how to deal with this possibility. And with that, we're going to start and take a look at FY17, this current government fiscal year. Now, when I say FY17, I'm referring to the U.S. federal government's FY17, which means October 1st of 2016 through September 30th of this year. So we're almost at the end of the current government fiscal year. So in this current FY17 environment, we didn't just see one continuing resolution, as is usually normal. We saw three. And we saw a series of continuing resolutions starting in October, continuing in December, all the way through May the 5th, where we finally saw an omnibus pass to fund the government through the rest of the year. Now, an omnibus is essentially all of those 12 appropriations bills combined into just one whole bill. So just think of it as a combined package of all the appropriations bills. So until May the 5th this year, the government didn't have its full funded budget for all the new priorities and initiatives that they were trying to accomplish. This is a particularly turbulent year for the government because of the administration change and because there's so much disagreement and uncertainty between Congress and the executive branch. And so we were living in a continuing resolution environment until May the 6th. So in effect, this isn't really anything brand new. Continuing resolutions have been fairly common over the past several fiscal years. However, it's still important to keep in mind exactly what does it mean for the business, what are the challenges, and a successful strategy for approaching those challenges. So, will there be a continuing resolution in FY18? And that's the government's FY18. I was hinting that there is a strong possibility, and let's just take a look at what's happened so far with that possible FY18 budget. So while normally the White House is supposed to submit that unified request for funding for FY18 in early February, it took until March just to release a skinny budget, as it was called, which was just an abbreviated version, and then until May to finally submit a full FY18 budget request for the upcoming year. Now, not to make any political commentary, but it's fair to say that that budget request has been met with a lot of criticism on both sides, and for practical purposes, that increases the likelihood that we'll see a continuing resolution in FY18. If there's not a lot of unity, especially within the executive branch and the legislative branch party, it's just going to increase the likelihood that there's going to be a stopgap continuing resolution while issues are worked out. So I would say that while not definite, and these things are never truly possible to predict with absolute certainty, I would say there's definitely a strong chance that we're going to see at least short-term continuing resolution in the beginning of FY18. So think early October, possibly stretching into November and maybe even December. So that's what we're looking at for this upcoming FY18. So now that we've established that our CR is fairly possible in this upcoming FY18, what does that exactly mean? What are the challenges associated with the continuing resolution? How does it affect our business? So first, it's important to note that agencies, while they're under a continuing resolution, are tied to the previous year's budgets. So in FY18, that would mean that they're stuck with FY17 budgets and initiatives. They have new initiatives for the new fiscal year, but they don't have the money that's officially granted to go towards those new initiatives. So essentially, they're just stuck with those FY17 numbers for, it's a bit up in the air exactly when a continuing resolution may end. So, in FY17, we saw 3 continuing resolutions, so it wasn't just, one period of a continuing resolution. It can go on for quite a while. So they're tied to the previous year's budgets, and they can't award funds for new initiatives and projects. Now, there are sometimes a few exceptions granted for this, but generally speaking, agencies, they can't award funds for anything new as far as initiatives and projects because they have been officially granted that money by Congress. Now, there's a couple things that you may see as a result of this big-time restriction. One thing agencies may do is they may modify current contracts as a stopgap. So while they can't exactly award new funds to go towards those new initiatives, they may modify existing contracts to basically fill the need gap in the short term. And because it's a current contract, it can be kind of finagled to be kind of a pre-existing budget requirement. So it's not really classified as a new requirement, even though it essentially is going to be filling a new requirement. It's kind of like a loophole. We're using last year's monies and last year's contract to fill new requirements in the short term. Now, that's not necessarily something you're going to see across the board or will be a widespread technique that the government may employ, but it's one possibility you may see. It's one thing that the government has in their toolkit to kind of address that. Another thing you may see is a reliance on shorter-term contracts and shorter-term competes and recompetes. While under that window of a CR, a lot of times what you see is the government will look to issue contracts that are very short term, intended to last just until the CR doesn't, continue on. I'm seeing that there may be a slide issue, so I'm just going to go back and move forward again just to make sure it went through here. So back to the short-term contracts with short-term competes and recompetes. The government may just try to issue a contract that lasts just until they expect the CR to end. So rather than issuing a contract for multiple years or buying a service that will last until the end of the fiscal year, it'll just last for maybe a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, until finally, agencies are hoping that the CR is ended and they have access to those new funds. So it's important to keep an extra close eye on any potential competes or recompetes, especially if you know that a task order or a contract is expiring in the time frame of October or November, when a CR is very likely, to make sure to be focused in on those opportunities, because the compete or recompete may be pretty quick. It may not necessarily go through the full scale that you would see with a normal in a normal environment. So those are two things you want to keep in mind as far as things that the agencies may be doing in response to the challenges you see there at the top, which is mainly the challenges the agencies are tied to those previous year's budgets. So the big strategy I would propose to anyone who's faced with a possible continuing resolution when they're selling to the U.S. federal government is to really focus in on existing customers during the beginning of the fiscal year where you're likely to see that CR. So think in October as well as in November, you really want to think about your existing customers just in the short term. Because all these agencies are tied to those previous year's budgets, so in FY18, they'd be tied to all those FY17 budgets and priorities, it's going to be a lot easier for you to sell to existing customers or accounts that have some room for growth than to reach out to brand new existing customers. This is because they can kind of finagle new requirements into existing contracts and existing task orders. They have that additional latitude, as I was just referring to before. So essentially you want to focus in on shoring up those existing customers rather than necessarily trying to break a whole lot of new ground while you're under the CR. Now this isn't to say that you should just, obviously you shouldn't ignore any potential new business that you may have in FY18, and who knows how long a CR may last. A continuing resolution may only last a couple weeks. So there's a whole lot more time in the fiscal year to sell to those new customers. But just in the short term, just for your Q1, your government Q1, you want to focus in on those existing customers. Just because they have additional latitude to sell or to buy from people that they're already buying from under FY17 requirements. So that covers the continuing resolution portion. I'm going to switch now and pivot to the public sector technology trends. And these are going to be some broad trends that we're seeing across several different technology verticals. And I'll touch on these verticals now. I'm going to talk about cybersecurity, big data and analytics, infrastructure, and cloud. Now, this isn't necessarily every technology there is out there, but these are the ones I'm going to be focusing on today as broadly applicable categories I think we'd all be interested in. If you have a question about any of these trends I'm talking about, if you want to have more detail, feel free to shoot a question and answer. I may not be able to get to it today, but I'll be able to refer it to either one of my colleagues or address it myself later. So I'm going to break these down across the federal government as well as some trends I see in the SLED market as well. So let's start with cybersecurity in the Department of Defense. So I'm not sure how familiar this audience is with the public sector market. I'm going to try to keep it more basic and high level so that everyone can follow with me, just in case anyone's not too familiar with the public sector market, and kind of walk you through each of these trends. But if you have any questions, if you would like to know more detail or a little fuller explanation, just shoot me a question. So first thing I would like to note is that the Department of Defense has this new command called Cybercom. It was an idea that they had cooked up about 5 or 6 years ago, and it is essentially going to be the new DoD cyber arm, so to speak, that will be conducting military operations, both defensive and offensive, in the cyberspace realm. So that Cyber Command was, beginning to be stood up in 2012, and every year has been kind of making more and more progress. And now, for the past year or two, there's been a question of, will the Cyber Command, which has components from all the various service branches, be stood up as a full command? So, for those of you who don't know, there's various combatant commands that cover each sector of the world. So there's one for CENTCOM, which covers the Middle East. There's one for Europe, which is called EUCOM. There's all these different commands, and Cybercom will be the one that covers the cyberspace domain. So Congress this year finally said that they're allowing and, in fact, ordering Cyber Command to transition over to being a full command. Now, Congress can't necessarily force Cybercom to do this. However, they're giving their official blessing. And then basically the decision moved over to the Commander-in-Chief, the President, to ultimately decide when to transition Cyber Command to being a full command. Now, Trump just did that in the past week or two, so going into the next fiscal year, we'll see that Cyber Command will be established as a full command. Now, what does that mean for everybody here? What you're going to see is that there's going to be a lot of cyber spending coming out of Cyber Command through this fiscal year, all the way through the next several fiscal years, because they have, not only because of their mission and because they're scaling up big time, is they also have a special $75 million year funding, and that's every government fiscal year, for rapid procurement of cyber tools. Now, anyone who has sold to the government knows that oftentimes it takes forever sometimes to sell to the government due to all the procurement red tape. Now, this is a special fund that is going to be able to kind of bypass a lot of that red tape. So it's a particularly valuable pool of money that's going to be coming out of Cyber Command every year through 2021, I believe, for rapid procurement of cyber tools. So Cybercom is a must-focus agency for everybody here. Now, Navy is also increasing their cybersecurity spend, and they're particularly focused on resilience and automated network threat detection and healing. Now, this is something you see across a lot of DoD as well as the government at large. They have a lot of, in some cases they have network awareness, and they're able to kind of patch certain things manually, but they really want their networks to kind of heal themselves automatically, to detect threats and address them and patch and heal their networks automatically. And this is a particular priority for Navy, and they're going to be increasing their cybersecurity spend going into the upcoming fiscal year to address that. So if you're a vendor who sells any of those kinds of solutions, you want to keep an eye on Navy. They're going to be making a splash in that department. DISA is essentially the IT agency for the DoD. It stands for the Defense Information Systems Agency. They're focused on mobile security, endpoint threat containment, and unified situational awareness. So mobile security is fairly straightforward. Mobility with mobile devices has been a big priority for DISA. So they're really focused now on securing those mobile devices and making sure that all the data contained within those devices is secure. And endpoint threat containment, is fairly straightforward. DISA has a lot of different endpoints it's responsible throughout the DoD, and is concerned about containing threats once they've gotten into an endpoint. So, anything that is able to seal off an endpoint once there's been an infection. That's what one of the things DISA is particularly interested in. Now, unified situational awareness is essentially kind of the DoD has so many different domains, so many different agencies, so many different partners, that any tools that allow them to get a unified picture of what's going on in their networks especially anything that plays nice with other vendors, with other technologies, because they have so many different networks. They have their classified networks, they have their unclassified networks, and a multitude of networks within those two. So DHA is the Defense Health Agency. They're essentially the agency that's responsible for the military health system. And they're particularly concerned about medical device security. So think all the various medical devices you may see in a hospital, but particularly in a medical hospital. And just a couple more here. The Air Force, they're really short right now on cyber manpower. So you're going to see them relying a lot more on tools, particularly defensive cyber tools, to help fill the gaps because they just don't have enough people. And Army and Air Force are both increasingly utilizing bug bounty programs. I mean, you see this a lot across the commercial sector as well. Companies will essentially provide a bounty for any hackers that find and submit vulnerabilities. The Army and Air Force is increasingly employing these programs as well. So let's move on to the civilian agencies. So cybersecurity spend is going to be the most safe tech category as far as there's going to be a lot of budget cuts for the civilian agencies in FY18. But cyber is the one thing that no one wants to cut the budget for. It's so important in this day and age that it's going to be the most resilient sector of technology from potential budget cuts to the civilian space in the federal government. Now there's the big CDM contract, which is transitioning to the Alliant and GSA schedules. So if you're doing a lot of business with CDM or involved with that, you're going to want to keep a close eye on that transition. DHS has the big Domino contract, which is essentially going towards improving their Einstein system, which was one that they awarded to Raytheon, and there was this whole long, dragged-out protest for that contract. And finally, they went back and they reviewed the whole procurement process, the whole competition, determined that everything was done correctly. So they re-awarded that contract to Raytheon on June 9th. And that IDIQ is valued up to $1 billion over the next 5 years. And this is essentially going to be developing DHS's next generation national cybersecurity protection system. And it's going to be delivering a lot of new capabilities. And you're going to want to keep a close eye on that. It stands for, again, just to reiterate, Domino stands for Development, Operations, and Maintenance Contract. The DOE is the Department of Energy, and they're looking to employ a lot more of open source solutions in the cyberspace. So, solutions that aren't locked down with a lot of proprietary restrictions. This is something, the government at large is trying to incorporate more open source solutions. They're very concerned about vendor lock-in. DOE is definitely emphasizing open source solutions when they're looking at different cyber tools. Now, VA has the new Choice Act, which was signed by President Trump on August 12th, which essentially allows veterans to have more choice within their community for health care. So the Veterans Administration is going to be looking at expanding their data protection requirements because they're going to have to exchange data and share data with more than just military hospitals or VA-affiliated hospitals. They're going to have to be dealing with trying to protect veterans' data as it goes across the healthcare space. So if you have data protection solutions, particularly ones that have applicable use space in the medical space, you're going to take a close look at VA through the next couple fiscal years as this Choice Act begins to be implemented. Finally, look at the SLED market. That's the state, local, and education market. You're seeing more and more states are establishing CISO positions. Those are the Chief Information Security Officer positions. So they're going to have someone in charge, essentially, of all their cybersecurity, of all their cyber defense. And that's going to be important to keep track of who those new CISOs are if you're selling cyber solutions. They're also having increased emphasis on cyber hygiene and training. I don't think anyone here would be surprised to know that a lot of state and local government officials are not necessarily highly trained on cyber hygiene, so this is a big priority for them. And over the next 12 months, we're going to see a lot more enterprise adoption of security compliance, network behavior analysis, data protection, and identify and access management, identity and access management, I should say. So we may see a lot of pockets already existing of these various solutions, but we're going to see a lot more enterprise-wide approach. States looking to buy on more an enterprise level and consolidating the pre-existing purchases they may have and looking to fill in the gaps in these technology spaces. Now let's move over to big data and analytics. As you see here, I'm going to first start with DoD, then move to the civilian agencies, and wrap up each category with the SLED market. So in DoD, DHA, that's the Defense Health Agency, so all the medical stuff, they have this new big MHS Genesis, which is the Military Health System Genesis program, which is essentially their new big electronic health record system, which they're working on, which is going to be DoD's new health record system across all of the various service branches. And it's going to have a lot of data that is both structured and unstructured that will need to be analyzed. So if you have solutions that can help the government, particularly DHA, help analyze, help manage, help clean up all that data and manage it both in a structured and unstructured level, you're going to want to get in touch with DHA and particularly the program manager for MHS Genesis about how your solution may get involved there, because that's just it's a very large and important program for DHA. Now, Navy is reviewing some best practices from their current efforts with big data to develop an enterprise-wide data vision and strategy. Across all of DoD, you see a lot of talk about the challenges associated with having so much information and not really getting a lot of actionable use out of it. So Navy is looking across all of its service to identify what's worked, what hasn't as far as big data is concerned, and try to lay out a more unified, consistent approach to this vertical. So you may see in the next couple fiscal years a more unified and explicit strategy from Navy in regards to data. So Army is seeking some AI and machine learning solutions in order to counteract electronic warfare and possible threats in the space. Now, Army only has so much manpower that they can devote to this, so they're looking at AI machine learning to help fill the gap, just like Air Force was with cyber defense. Army is looking to fill a manpower gap with commercial off-the-shelf technology solutions to help address the threat of electronic warfare, which in this day and age is becoming increasingly more and more of a threat. So combatant commands like Cybercom I was mentioning earlier, there's all these different combatant commands across the various sectors of the world with all sorts of either focusing on different geographic areas or like our Special Forces Combatant Command, SOCOM, are just some examples. They're dealing with an absolute overload of data. Previously the problem is, going back several years, the DoD is like, we don't necessarily have enough data. Now the DoD, particularly the combatant commands, have so much data that they don't know what to do with it. They're just being swamped with it. So they need help managing it and analyzing it in a meaningful way. So this isn't just just creating a few bar graphs or a few pie charts that don't necessarily help them move the needle. They need help cleaning data up to get it into a usable state, managing all that data, and then driving actionable conclusions from that data. And this is something you see across all of the commands. Everyone has this problem. So if you have an innovative big data solution or analytical solution in this space, you're going to want to talk to the combatant commands about how your solution may fit. So in the civilian space, we're seeing the Data Act coming into effect, which is the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act of 2014, which is essentially designed to make information on federal expenditures more easily accessible and transparent. So we're seeing that coming into effect, which is creating a need for more standardized data and reporting of that data to the public. So all of these various civilian agencies have their own way of kind of keeping their IT investment data, and they need to standardize that amongst themselves in order to be able to be cognizant of what they're spending on and to be able to release that information to the public. So, it was enacted in 2014, and we're seeing every year it coming more and more into effect. So when you're talking to civilian agencies about where your big data or analytical solution may fit, keep in mind that the Data Act is going to be a major pain point for them, particularly in the financial sections of the various agencies. We're seeing Census also dealing with a huge data influx from all the self-reported data for the upcoming 2020 census. So this is just another situation in the government where there's just so much data that the government isn't exactly able to manage all of that data. So Census is going to be another place you're going to want to look if you're selling really great data management and data analytics solutions. The Forest Service is exploring acquisition of various visualization, analytic, and information sharing tools. They have this program, the U.S. Forest Inventory and Analysis Program, that needs a lot of help in the analytical department and actually being able to share that information with the relevant partners. So if you have a really innovative visualization or analytic tool, you're going to want to reach out to the U.S. Forest, particularly the Inventory and Analysis Program, about how your solution may help them move the needle in this department. Now, in the SLED market, you're seeing their concerns with data often derived from the difficulties with storage. They have a lot of outdated storage. They're much more behind the curve compared to the federal government. And just from a storage standpoint, they're having difficulty working with data. So if you have innovative storage solutions, you're going to want to look particularly at the state and local level about how you can help them modernize their various data storage quickly. You're also seeing, just like the creation of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer position, you're seeing the creation of the Chief Data Officer position in state and local governments. This is essentially kind of following the trend from the federal government, where you're seeing one person in charge of managing data and making sure that data derives actionable conclusions across a state or local government. So this is going to be a very important POC to keep in mind if you're selling these sorts of technologies. The SLED market is also beginning to see some initial investments in analytic technologies. Now, they're not as far along as you would say the federal government is in this space, but you're beginning to see the SLED market start to look at analytics and how it can help them in terms of achieving their missions or saving them money. So they're still, again, behind the federal government in this regard, but you're starting to see, especially in FY18, some initial spending towards analytic technologies. So infrastructure. The Air Force is piloting infrastructure as a service at Hanscom Air Force Base. So if you have a really compelling infrastructure as a service solution and you're selling to the DoD, you're going to want to keep a close eye on that pilot up at Hanscom Air Force Base and how it's going for the Air Force. And it's likely, once this pilot is complete, the Air Force will begin to look at rolling out a more enterprise-wide approach to this. So keep a close eye on that. SOCOM is the Special Forces Combatant Command, and they're based down in Tampa, Florida. Now, they're very interested in hyper-converged infrastructure. This is a very new and innovative technology. They've demonstrated a strong willingness and interest in this type of technology. So if this is one of the solutions that you are selling or is in your area of expertise, reach out to SOCOM down in Tampa about how you can help them get their hands around it. They're very interested in it. The Defense Health Agency has the Med Community of Interest program. and that's really looking to incorporate VPN over the end of FY17. That's the government's FY17, and going into FY18. They're also working on creating a centrally managed network with a centrally managed desktop. So right now, DHA has kind of got components from all the different service branches, and when DHA was created, it essentially combined all these various military health components. So now they're looking to standardize that, their network, and associated desktop environment. So networking vendors, you want to keep a close eye on this, as well as if you sell virtualization solutions or communications tools. But from an infrastructure standpoint, it's very important to keep an eye on how DHA is essentially managing those and how they're looking to do that in FY18. Navy has been modernizing its afloat network, so this is their network out at sea with the CANES program. And they're soon going to be recompeting the NGENS program, which is overseeing the NMCI network. So the CANES program stands for the Consolidated Afloat Networks and Enterprise Services. NGEN stands for Next Gen Enterprise Networks. Now the NGENS contract, the current existing one, ends on June 27th, 2018. And for the upcoming contract, they're looking to merge NGENS along with their OneNet network and try to possibly also tie that into cloud. Now, if you're an infrastructure vendor, you're going to want to keep a close eye on the NGENS recompete, which should start gearing up here in the very near future because, again, their current contract ends at the end of June. Finally, we're seeing Army having network bandwidth issues, which are caused by just sheer sensor overload. Tying back to that big data overload we were talking about before, it's affecting them on a network front. So if you have networking infrastructure solutions, you're going to want to reach out to Army and talk about how you can help them address transmitting all of that data from their sensors back to the center of their enterprise. The Department of State over in the civilian space, their foreign affairs network, they're working on consolidating all their overseas infrastructure associated with that while expanding the service of the network to overseas governmental entities. So this is another place where you're going to want to keep a close eye on the centralization of networking infrastructure over there in the Department of State. Now the DOJ, the Department of Justice, is working on consolidating all of their data centers down to just 3 core enterprise data facilities, essentially data centers. It's moving slower than they were originally hoping for and anticipated, but they're still working on it. Now, those data centers will ultimately be 2 FBI-owned data centers as well as 1 DEA-leased data centers. They were on track, I should say, to close 7 data centers here in FY17. We're on the streets. It's moving a little slower than that. But you shall see increasing focus going towards consolidating down to just 3 over the end of FY17 here with the last month, as well as in FY18. Now USDA, that's the U.S. Department of Agriculture, is using the National Finance Center and National IT Center data centers to accelerate shared service opportunities. So in terms of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, you're seeing a lot of these beginning to be rolled out at the National Finance Center and National IT Center data centers. USDA is leaning on those 2 points, on those data centers, to help bring shared service opportunities to their enterprise. So if you're selling IaaS, SaaS, PaaS solutions, take a close look at those data centers at the National Finance Center and National IT Center. Finally, IRS is having an internal debate about modernizing their mainframes that process data. IRS is probably one of those most antiquated agencies in terms of some of its back-end infrastructure. They're still using a lot of mainframes to process data. Now, to this point, those mainframes have actually been doing a great job at it. That's why they haven't modernized them yet, and they're also more secure because they're more contained and written in COBOL and whatnot. But frankly, they know that they can't maintain mainframes just going into the future. It's just not going to be sustainable long term. So they're kind of having a difficult time deciding about what their strategy is going to be, but you want to keep a close eye from an infrastructure standpoint on exactly what their plans are to modernize their mainframes. Going into FY18 here in October, you may see them developing a more explicit strategy about modernizing their back-end mainframes that are doing all of the tax data processing. Now, over in the SLED space, we see that cities are really working on building out public Wi-Fi as part of citizen engagement initiatives. It's a very popular thing now, very trendy as part of smart cities initiatives, a lot of focus on public Wi-Fi. It's also worth noting that security for those Wi-Fi networks is going to be important as well, so cyber vendors should also take note of this initiative. State and local governments are also looking at making sure that employees who are out in the field a lot of the time have secure access to their central networks. So network security, mobility solutions, virtualization, a lot of these technologies are going to be very critical on the state and local level, and you're going to probably see more and more spending in this regard at the state and local level over the upcoming fiscal year. And on that note, you're going to see a lot of infrastructure upgrades beginning to take mobility into account, just like I mentioned there. Any infrastructure upgrades going forward are going to want to be compatible with a paradigm that sees mobility as a key component of the modern state and local employee. As employees are out and about in the field, they're going to need access to all of their data, all of their applications and whatnot, from a mobility standpoint. So make sure that you keep mobility in mind when selling to SLED customers. And finally, let's take a look at cloud. So in the DoD, the Defense Logistics Agency, which is essentially the main logistical agency with the DoD, is looking at commercial cloud solutions. Right now, they just rely on data centers, but they're really interested in leveraging commercial cloud, and they haven't done so yet, so it's worth keeping a close eye on this from a cloud standpoint. Army, currently over at Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, has a private cloud pilot going on. So it's, if you're selling to the Army and cloud is something in your patch, you're going to want to keep a close eye on how this pilot is going. If it goes well, or if Army really likes the results they're getting, you can expect to see a wider expansion of private cloud in the Army. Air Force is working on migrating to cloud-based email for more storage capacity. So that's the main effort right now from the Air Force's standpoint on the cloud level. DISA, which again is the main IT agency for the DoD, has awarded a contract to CSRA for MilCloud 2.0. Now, MilCloud 2.0 is DISA's essentially, it's like they're offering to the rest of the DoD for a military cloud. So if you're another DoD agency, you can essentially pay DISA to use their DISA's cloud, which is called MilCloud. So MilCloud 2.0 is going to see more emphasis on infrastructure as a service capability. But if you're selling a cloud-compatible solution, if you have any solutions that maybe are compatible with existing cloud solutions, keep a close eye on this award to CSRA. You may want to get in touch about how your solution may fit into MilCloud 2.0. Cloud spending is flat from FY16 to FY17 for the federal civilian agencies. Now, this is a bit surprising, but I wouldn't expect this necessarily to continue from FY17 to FY18. And the cloud is just too important. I mean, some of it is derived from the cost savings associated with moving to the cloud, but we're just seeing wider and wider expansion of the cloud. So I'd still expect that to go up in FY18. HHS is driving innovation in terms of infrastructure as a service adoption. You want to particularly focus on CMS as a particularly cloud-ready sector of the civilian space. DHS is ramping up to cloud via their Enterprise Computing Services contract. And they're really looking at both public clouds as well as hybrid solutions right now. They're not exactly sure which they're going to go with, but if you're looking to sell cloud or have cloud-compatible solutions, keep a close eye on DHS in terms of this contract, in which way they're leaning as far as public cloud or hybrid. And I would guess they might lean hybrid, but it still remains to be seen. Now, the FBI is becoming more and more incorporated into the intelligence community's iSight cloud. Now, this iSight cloud is often referred to in the public as, the CIA's deal with Amazon, and Amazon has essentially set up a separate special instance of its cloud services just for the intelligence community. And FBI is a member of the intelligence community, and so they're becoming more and more plugged into that iSight cloud. If you have more questions about that, please reach out to me later, as I'll mention my email here at the end. Now, FAA is looking to move its next generation systems to a hybrid cloud through a deal that they signed with CSRA. So you're seeing in a couple spaces here, CSRA making a splash with its cloud offerings in the federal government. So if you're interested in selling to the FAA either a cloud-compatible solution or an infrastructure solution that may work well with a hybrid cloud environment, reach out to both CSRA as well as FAA about seeing how your solution may fit in. And finally, let's wrap up with SLED. Private clouds are still preferred over public in the SLED space. You don't necessarily see this all the time in the federal market, but it's certainly very true in the SLED market. Something you're also seeing is migrating legacy applications to cloud is just a really big priority right now. Everyone's having a lot of difficulty doing that. You've had a lot of legacy systems just running on back-end data centers for a really long time, and state and local governments are having a hard time dealing with the migration standpoint of applications to new cloud environments. It's a big pain point for them. As far as cloud services are concerned, we're seeing disaster recovery and storage being the really important cloud services for the SLED market. And I touched on how challenging storage is for the SLED market for state and local governments and education. So you're seeing cloud as being one popular way of addressing that concern. You're also seeing a lot of IT procurement reform, which is now allowing states to pay by the drink, so to speak, for cloud, which essentially means that states are only going to pay for cloud what they actually, for the services they actually consume. So they're only going to pay for how much data or how much processing they're using. They're not going to just buy whole scale. Previously, the contracting wasn't set up to allow that, but now you're starting to see things change. So states are probably going to look to do more cloud by the drink, which should make it even easier for cloud to get a lot of headway into the state and local environment. And finally, I've touched on a lot of different public sector trends. I want to talk about what exactly we do here on the market intelligence team, and I'll explain what our different offerings and deliverables are, so that in case you want to learn more, if you want to engage with us, if you have questions about the public sector or looking to jumpstart your business there, we can be a valuable asset here. And just to explain what our role is as market intelligence. So here's an overview of our team led by Director Tim Larkins. And we have a couple different patches here. You see me there over on the left. My particular area of expertise is the DoD and the intelligence community, alongside Stephanie Maloney. On the civilian space, Chris Wiedemann and Kevin Shaker are our civilian specialists. And over on the state and local and education market, Rachel Eckert is your best POC. And I'd also like to point out Lloyd McCoy and Shelby Nand, who are handling our commercial capabilities, which we're rolling out. Previously, we have been focused very much on the public sector market, but we're also expanding our capabilities into the commercial market. So, you may sell both commercially and in the public sector, and depending on exactly what space you're trying to target, we can help you out with one of our deliverables, which I'll touch on here shortly. On the public sector side, we have several different deliverables, which we work with our various clients and vendors to help them jumpstart their business in the public sector. And I'll just break down what a couple of these are. Our most popular offerings are probably our streamlined sales pipeline development, which is essentially a more granular version of the briefing. So first, this is more of a broader webinar that is intended to just touch at a high level various sectors of government, whereas our streamlined sales pipeline development, or SPEEDY for short, are much more focused in on a granular level on specific agencies, and we talk about who are the decision makers at those agencies, who's doing the buying, who's making the decisions, what's the money situation like, what are the various specific initiatives and priorities for the various agencies, and how do we get in touch with those various decision makers. And our tactical offering is very similar as well. So we can essentially, the metaphor my director Tim Larkins likes to use is that, if you're hunting, we can essentially provide the rifle and get you about 5 feet from the deer to make it really easy to capture that big game. So, from our SPEEDY offering is what I would recommend if you're looking to do a first engagement with us. And we could talk about, just for example, My Patch. If you're looking to get in touch with the U.S. Cyber Command, like I touched on earlier, I can tell you, okay, these are the people at Cybercom you need to talk to. Here are their initiatives and budgets and priorities. And then I can work with one of our other components here at immixGroup, the lead development team, to help generate hot leads in those various sectors of the government. Now, over on the commercial side, we also have quite a few offerings, and I'll defer to my colleague Lloyd McCoy as expert on those commercial offerings. But we have all these various offerings that are tailored towards jumpstarting business in the commercial sector. So if you have any interest in these various deliverables, please reach out to Lloyd McCoy here at immixGroup and Arrow, and he'll be able to talk to you in more detail exactly about these offerings and how we can help you jumpstart your business. Now, with all that said, thank you for taking the time here to join me for today's webinar. And I'm looking now at some of the various questions here. I will say that all these slides will be available later on PDF format, and you have my email here, which will also be on the slides. If you have a specific question which I'm not able to get to today, or if you have a question about how here at Market Intelligence we can help you out or do a deliverable for you. So feel free to reach out via email. And I'm filtering through some questions now. I see one here at Cybercom. I see one from Mark Romidi asking, where is the Cyber Command posting the requirements? So this is a great question, and being a DoD guy, I can address that quite easily. There is going to be a Industry Day for Cybercom coming up in the next month. I believe it's around the 3rd week or 4th week of September. It's going to be in Springfield, Virginia. They haven't announced any other details about that Industry Day yet, but keep a close eye on the Industry Day. I expect that's where they're going to make a lot of their requirements more explicit. Here and there, they've just been using FBO or attending a few different Industry Day or AVCIA. AVCIA is basically an organization that hosts a lot of industry events, so sometimes Cybercom goes there. But I would look out, and it's the 3rd or 4th week of September, and then you're going to see Cybercom hosting their own Industry Day in Springfield to address those requirements. What are the terms CDM and Domino? So CDM stands for Continuous Diagnostic Monitoring, And Domino, I believe, stands for, I want to say development, integration, and engineering, I want to say. Maybe forget the last acronym. But essentially both are major DHS contracts that have been, particularly CDM has already been issued, and those are major vehicles for contract spending for cybersecurity. I would recommend reaching out to my colleague Thomas O'Keefe. I'll back up my slides here a bit. Thomas O'Keefe or Chris Wiedemann if you have a particular question about Domino or CDM and how you can get involved with that program.
Thank you, Mark.
I think all the questions have been addressed. Oh, one more question here. Where can I find more info about the Air Force's IAAS pilot? I will defer to my colleague here, Stephanie Maloney, as she is the Air Force expert. Just shoot me an email let me back over the slides here. Just shoot me an email here at mark_Wisinger@immixGroup.com, and I'll forward that over to Stephanie, and she'll get in touch with you about that IAAS pilot.
Thank you, Mark. And as Mark indicated, you can download this presentation in a PDF form by simply clicking that resource list widget, which is the green folder. And if you click on that, you can download the presentation. We thank you for joining today, and thank you, Mark, for a great presentation.
Thank you, everybody, for joining today. And feel free to reach out or connect with me on LinkedIn.